Okay, so once again, my name is Josh Brothheim, and I'm going to be leading today's training. And what we're going to be going over is the Level 1 certification program. Essentially, we're going to go over the next 3 hours. We're going to go through a demonstration of the system, show you some features, and then give you some hands-on time to actually do some of the features that we show you via labs. And then we'll take the certification exam at the end. So we're going to be together for about the next 3 hours. So let's settle in and get cozy. If you have any questions during today's session, go ahead and post them in the chat. My peer, Mario Sanchez, is on the line, and he'll be assisting in answering questions, so we'll be able to answer those. And like I mentioned, we'll be recording today's session and posting it as well. So let's go ahead and just dive in here. So I'm actually going to start with the demonstration first. So let me go ahead and get the slide deck, and let's go ahead and jump into the scenario that I want to show you. So I want you to envision that we have a sister company called Travelogic. And what Travelogic is an online website that allows people to book flights, check airfare, rent cars, those type of sites. I'm sure we've used all those either personally or professionally before. And this is in a production environment, and we currently have people booking and happy, and they're getting their vacation scheduled. We're getting revenue. Everyone's happy. I get a Slack message that says, Sumo Logic alert, gateway response timeout, Slack. Now that's saying Slack because the message was delivered in Slack, but I get this Slack message delivered to me. And it's letting me know something's wrong with the system. It's not really letting me know what specifically, but there's an anomaly there. And at the same time, I get a call from my manager, and he says, hey, Josh, people are having problems checking out of the website. Well, if they can't check out of the Travelogic website, they can't book their cars, they can't book their airfare, they get annoyed. It's a bad customer service experience. We don't get revenue. It's a bad revenue experience. And so this is not good, and I need to fix it and figure out what caused it. Both kind of a two-pronged approach here. So how am I going to do that? How am I going to figure out what's going on in my environment? Well, I'm going to use Sumo Logic to help me. So what I've created over here, let me just refresh. Actually, I can keep these. Actually, let's refresh it real fast. So what I have here is a dashboard that is showing me different things that are going on regarding the operations in my Travelogic environment. And so I have things like reporting nodes. I have things like VPC network rejects, database issues, Redis issues, and checkout service, among a few others. Now, you may know what these things are. You may not. If you're looking at these in troubleshooting, hopefully you know what they are. But if you don't, that's okay, because with the dashboard, very simplistic view, red is good. Red is bad. Green is good. And so I see a bunch of red going on. I see the checkout service has a bunch of errors. It's in red, 6,000 errors over the last 60 minutes. Well, I know people can't check out. And now I have a little bit of kind of evidence that people can't check out, or at least that there are errors related to the checkout service. Still need more information to figure out what caused it and what's going on. But at least now I'm starting to see in the system that something's not right here with the checkout service. I'm going to drill into this Travelogic services detail, which is just a deeper dive into that services. And what I see here are a couple different panels that I want to go over. The first one in this top left here is showing me information about bookings. I kind of want you to ignore the portion left of about 515, but let's look at the portion from the right of 515. So what we see at about 515 is people who are booking successfully, represented by green. So we see successes, people booking, happy vacationers, booking. And then about, about 548 or so, we see a bunch of failed bookings start to occur, represented by the orange. So people were booking, and then about 548 or so, a bunch of failed bookings started to occur. Well, that's about the time I got the Slack message, around the time my manager called me. So this is letting me know something around 548-ish or so may have not been going properly. Still need a lot more information, but now I'm getting a little bit of time frame in here. If I look at this panel over here for errors of the last 7 days, what I see is a 60-minute window, so essentially about 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock this morning, Pacific Standard Time. And then what I see is the errors that have occurred. And so today's errors are listed in orange, yesterday's would be in blue, et cetera, et cetera. And what I see here is, once again, no errors. And then about 548 or so, we see some errors which are represented by the orange. So we start to see a bunch of errors occur. Well, this panel is helpful in two different ways. One, it's letting me know, once again, hey, that errors started to occur probably around that 548 point. And the other thing it shows me is during this 60-minute window, there were not errors yesterday during this time period. There were not errors the day before that, et cetera. And that's helpful for me to know, because if I had seen errors there yesterday, the day before that, that might just indicate that my system just, naturally produces errors during that time period. And, we get a few errors here and there, and they're not really a big deal. But this is letting me know that, hey, during the 60-minute window, errors are not normal. However, today we have them. So also letting me know something out of the ordinary is going on. I have this errors by node here. We'll talk about nodes and source names in a little bit. But what I do is, if I can mouse over these, the top two, there we go, say source name prod04.travel-checkout. And what this is letting me know is that there are errors associated with the travel-checkout service. Well, once again, I kind of know that, but this is also giving me more evidence within the system that the system is finding these errors. Over here, I have gateway latency average. And let me get my mouse kind of out of the way. There we go. And what this is showing me is the gateway latency that is occurring in my environment, and when that latency becomes out of the norm. So what this is showing me is that there is gateway latency, and the system has determined a range for what is acceptable for the gateway latency using the outlier operator, which we'll talk about in a little bit more, in much more detail. And so what I'm seeing is there was latency, and there will be latency. So the system is saying, okay, I know that there's going to be latency occurring. I'm never going to have zero latency in my gateway, but I can help you, the user, determine what's an acceptable range, and then let you know when things occur outside that range. And that's exactly what's happening here. So at 520 or so, the range is between 570 and 590 based on a bunch of different mathematical equations and parameters, and we'll talk about those later. And the processing was within that range, so that's acceptable. All these are within the normal range, And then what we have over here is we have a spike, and we have two pink triangles. And the pink triangles are representing outliers, which the system is basically saying, okay, I saw things were going very normal for the past period of time. Well, something out of the ordinary just happened. My results, or my processing milliseconds, are now outside that range, and I'm going to use a pink triangle to indicate that to you. And so that's certainly helpful to know. And then one more chart I have over here is CPU and total memory. And what this is showing, and let me get my mouse out of the way for that, or try to, is that different metrics associated with CPU and total memory. And what I see here is the numbers, or the metrics, are pretty consistent. Even if they are spiking and peaking, they're pretty consistent. So here, for example, we have memory usage. And you can see it certainly peaks and spikes. It's this dotted blue line, but it's consistent at least, which is good. Down here, we have metrics associated with CPU total in green. Once again, it peaks and valleys a little bit, but it's consistent at least. But then I have this guy right here. And this is related to travel checkout. And what this is showing is the average CPU total. And we see it was going, pretty normal. And then about 548, 547, that time that, things look like they went a little wacky, I have an indication of that right here, represented by this big spike. So I'm going to drill into these metrics and see if I can see what's going on, get a little more detail from the system. So I'm pulling the metrics related to the CPU and the memory usage. And at the same time, what I'm doing is I'm pulling logs related to my travel service down here. So at the very last line, I'm saying, show all the logs related to the travel service over the last hour. So I'm just looking at a 1 hour block. So essentially about a 5:11 to 6:11 local time. And with the logs, I'm saying, look at all those travel logs, but only show me those that have an error or exception. Look for that string within those logs. And at the very top of the screen, I have a heat map, which is indicating the occurrence or frequency of those log messages that have the keyword of error or exception in them. And so what I see up here is a heat map. And the heat map is showing me the darker the color and the more frequent occurrence of that string error or exception within the logs. And to the left of about 548 or 547, we see that there are some messages that have errors, more than we might expect. This is a test environment, so we're always kind of playing around in here. But the colors are fairly light, indicating that there's not that many logs that have error compared to another period where the color is darker over here. So to the right of 548, we see the darker color in the heat map, and we can go ahead and start to see the number of messages just increase. So over here to the left, it was 157, 183, 141. And to the right, we have 456, 450, et cetera. So we're seeing more error messages during the period of time where the system had errors, which kind of makes sense. So I'm going to drill into these logs. These are all broken out into 1 minute time quantizations. And so I'm going to select one and drill into it. So to look at the logs and see if I can see a little more detail about what's going on and ultimately how to resolve it as well. So I'm going to do a shift click on one of these 1 minute time segments. And now I'm looking at the logs that are associated with that 1 minute time segment. And so down here, I see errors because I'm telling the log system to show me all the errors or exceptions. So I see error, error, bunch of errors. If I look at these errors, I can even get a little indication of what may have gone wrong. So here, for example, with this error, I have error checkout charge 106, bad handshake, error SSL routine, SSL3 get server certificate verify failed. Well, that's interesting. If there was a certificate error, there might be checkout issues. So I'm seeing what possibly is wrong, but I haven't seen what caused it and ultimately or related to how to solve it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my search around in a couple different ways. The first way is I'm going to say just specifically look at the checkout service. I don't need everything in the travel environment. I know that there were checkout errors. It looks like it's related to the checkout service. So just show me the checkout stuff. At the same time, get rid of looking at error or exceptions because I want to look at a bigger picture. I don't want to just see errors or exceptions. I want to see everything that was going on because I want to get a better picture in that something probably happened or didn't happen, and then these errors started to occur. So let me see everything, the good and the bad. And then I'm going to change my time segment portion of the query and expand it out. Because right now I'm looking at a minute window from 552 to 553 when there were errors. And now, like I said, that's good to see those errors, but I want to get a bigger picture of what was going on. So I'm going to expand my search out over the last 60 minutes. Because over the last 60 minutes, I know things were working properly. I saw that people were checking out and then people were not checking out. So let me see the good and the bad. Let me see everything basically with the checkout service over the last 60 minutes and click start. The system is now grabbing all the logs related to the checkout service from the last 60 minutes. And I have the results here. So I have 57,000 results, 2,200 pages of results. Now, somewhere in these logs is going to be an indication of what went wrong. And I just need to find it now. And so now I could, if I wanted to, scroll through these pages and look through, all right, let's go through page 1. Do we see any errors or anything that caused errors? Nope. Let's go through page 2. Nope. Let's go through page 3. And I could do this. And if I did this and was patient enough or had enough free time, I would find out what went wrong. But that's not the way we want you to use Sumo Logic. It's not a good way to use a system that you purchased and are using for this purpose. So let me show you an easier way to get to what you might want to find from this data. And what we're going to point out here is a button that we call log reduce. And what log reduce is, it's almost like an easy button in our environment where it's going to take all the logs and look for common patterns within them and group them together. So let me go ahead and press the log reduce button. And now it's taking those 57,000 logs and like I said, looking for a pattern within them and grouping them all together and then going to show us those patterns. So it's doing it right now. It'll take another few seconds or so. And as you can see, it's starting to group them together. So with the first count here, or the first line here, it's saying these are the most common messages that are grouped together in this pattern. This is the second most, and so on and so forth. And so what I now see is that there are 56,000 messages, and they're grouped together. So there were 8,000 log messages that had this pattern. And this pattern, at the very end of it, has a transaction ID, which indicates a successful transaction and a successful checkout. And we would expect to see some successful checkouts because remember, we're looking at a time period when things were good as well as bad. So if we're looking at an hour window when things were good and bad, we'd expect to see some good indicated by a successful transaction ID. We expect to see some charging credit via gateway, once again, another step in the checkout process because things were good and bad. So we see a bunch of good things and a bunch of things in here. Now remember, we're starting to look for the errors, and here we see a bunch of errors. I see 1,400 of them, 1,400 of these. And while that's helpful to see all those errors, I need to still figure out what caused those errors. Just seeing the errors alone doesn't help me. So what I want to do is I'm going to take my count and just flip it around. Rather than looking at those things that happen most frequently, show me those things that happen least frequently over the last 60 minutes. Because something probably happened or didn't happen and then resulted in all these errors. Something didn't happen 8,000 times that resulted in 8,000 errors. Something probably failed or didn't work, or we'll see in a moment what happened. And then as a result, all these errors started to occur. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take my count and I'm just going to flip it around. So rather than looking at most frequent, show me least frequent. And when I do, I see this first error message. But if I go down here to the second one here, I see, oops, I'm going to show it to you here. I see Travelogic app starting cluster checkout. So this is related to the checkout service, version 1.14 dev. Well, why was development code loaded on a production server? Oh, somebody made a mistake and they pushed the wrong version of code to the production environment. The production environment had the wrong code and couldn't use the server certificates. The certificates failed, and as a result, people couldn't check out, and as a result, people got annoyed, and that's how we ended up in this situation. And so that's how you can use Sumo logic to help you troubleshoot what's going on in your environment and ultimately figure out what's going on or not going on, depending on the case, and then how to resolve it. So let's go ahead and let's see, I have a couple slides here related to this. So what we just showed in this last slide, and there we go, full screen there, are essentially three components to that demo of monitoring and troubleshooting. The first component was the alerts. And so with the alerts, we were able to be notified while we're not even sitting in Sumo Logic using Slack. We have the dashboard, which you can envision on a big screen showing you, here's where people were able to check out, here's where they weren't, and very simplistic view of, red, bad, green, good. And somebody walking by, if this is on a big screen, would be able to understand, hey, there's a bunch of red, things aren't good, let's, fix them. Everything's green, all's good, and let's continue on with our day. So you can still understand and be notified of critical events going on in Sumo Logic without sitting there running a query all day, which is certainly helpful for those type of people who don't want to run queries or can't run queries all day. We used the metrics to identify what was going on, and what was going on was we saw that CPU spike, and then we used the logs to identify why it was happening, and why it was happening was due to that inappropriate code being ingested or just pushed into the environment. Within Sumo Logic, there's 3 steps to data flow. It's important that you understand these. The first step we won't talk about too much, but it's worth going over. So essentially, your data is going to be out there in the world. It might be on a local device. It might be in a server farm. It might be in the cloud. It might be a bunch of different places. And in order for Sumo Logic to help you, we need to gather that data or have that data gathered and brought into Sumo Logic. And that's what step 1 is discussing, is data collection. So essentially taking all that data that's out there in the world and bringing it into Sumo Logic. Now you have that data sitting in Sumo Logic. That's where step 2 comes in. So you have the data sitting there, and until you start to tell it what to do, the data is just sitting there. And that's where the searching and analyzing is going to be important. Because now you're going to start to use operators to go through your data and pull out things that might be relevant, use charts to display that information, and use these operators to slice and dice your data, if you will. And then step 3 is, once again, that visualizing and monitoring. So now you have your data. Now you can start to visualize and monitor it using those alerts, using those dashboards. So once again, still gaining information from the system without having to search and analyze the data in step 2. This is the last chart that I'll show regarding collection, but it's worth showing, or it's a quick one at least, so it's worth just going over pretty quickly, because what this is just showing is essentially, regardless of where your data is out there in the world, it needs to be brought into Sumo Logic. So once again, maybe you're on the top left and you're using those AWS properties, you'll need to bring that data into Sumo Logic. Maybe you have APIs, top right, existing in the Google or O365 cloud, needs to be brought into Sumo Logic. On the bottom part of the screen, once again, still needs to be brought into Sumo Logic, but you have your data maybe sitting behind a firewall and you don't want your devices exposed to the internet. Data still needs to be brought in. It's just how you do that. Like I said, we don't really talk too much more about the collection in this class. If you're interested, we'll be discussing that next week at this time. Actually, it will be the level 3. And then wanted to show this slide regarding metadata. Metadata is not necessarily a Sumo Logic thing specifically, but the way we use it is important to know. So with metadata, these are going to be tags that are going to be associated with the log messages that are collected. So you're going to ingest this data, bring it into Sumo Logic and collect it. It's going to sit in Sumo Logic, and when it gets brought in, certain tags will be applied to it. And the tags are going to be important because they provide you and your users a way to locate your data. So let's say you want to find all your, I don't know, your Apache data, which we'll use Apache as an example throughout the morning here. If you want to find all your Apache data, you need to provide a way for your users to locate that Apache data. By default, the system will automatically apply some tags to your data, which are going to be things like the name of the collector. So that collector that's grabbing all that data, bringing it to Sumo Logic, you can use that as a naming convention to locate your data. You can use the source host, the source name, those first four that are not in bold. But the issue with those, of using those, is they may not provide a very clear definition to your users of where the data is located and how to find it. So for example, let's say you use the collector name, and you're going to have all these collectors grabbing data and bringing it into Sumo Logic. Your collector names might not be a clear explanation of where the data resides, because you might have just collectors called collector 8421 and collector 9532. Are your users going to know that one collector with that name is bringing Apache data and another is bringing O365 data? Probably not. They might, depending on how close they are to the implementation of Sumo Logic, but it doesn't provide a really clear path of where the data is located. And so what we encourage you to use is a source category. This will be the main metadata tag and can be freely configured, which is really why it's helpful. And it's going to provide you the ability to locate your data and provide a structure to find that data. So for example, and I should have an example here, I don't have one on the screen, but we'll use the example for today of labs/Apache/access as a source category. Well, by looking at that name, I know, hey, this is my lab data versus my production data. This is my Apache data versus my O365 data. And it provides me some, I was going to say context clues, but it provides me some direction as to where to find that data. And so I can, if I want to look for all my Apache data, I know look for the source category of wildcard/Apache. And we'll talk about those in more detail in a few moments as well. But just want to express the importance of them. So let's go ahead and let's actually dive into another demo, but more based on the features of Sumo Logic. So let me go ahead and switch to Firefox. Okay, so hopefully you've seen this screen before. If you haven't, this is the screen that you will get when you first log into Sumo Logic. And it's a welcome screen, pretty traditional. It's going to provide you some kind of quick links to get to your recently accessed things, recently opened things. You'll have a Learn tab. Certainly want to promote this. This is where you can learn more about Sumo Logic. So this is going to provide you a bunch of different avenues to learn more. We're going to add some videos in here. So maybe you want to watch the video to learn more about Sumo Logic. We have some tutorials, lab work. We'll actually go through this using Sumo Logic tutorial in probably about half an hour or so. You'll have access to cheat sheets, which will give you information about the outliers and a bunch of the different ways to slice and dice your data. Documentation is in here. Community, I'll give a quick plug for the community. What the community allows you to do is interact with other Sumo Logic users and discuss features, discuss ways to utilize Sumo Logic in a moderated environment. So you can interact with your peers, which we found is pretty helpful. So the idea behind the Learn tab is different ways for you to learn. Do you want to watch videos? Do you want to do lab work? Do you want to read documentation? It's all in there. And then we have the certification tab. We'll certainly be going over this in more detail in a couple hours, but this is where we'll take the exam. So I'll go over this portion once we get there. But I'm just going to start off with doing a new log search. So I can either go from my home page and do a log search, or I can go to the very top tab and do a new log search. Same difference. Ultimately, I'm going to get to this screen. Now, this screen is where I'm going to start to search things. This screen can be a bit intimidating at first glance, but let's go ahead and kind of demystify what's going on here. So I have a search window right here. Anything I put in here will be searched. So if I want to go ahead and search through my data for something very simple, I can go ahead and do so. So let's go ahead and start and say, I want to search for the string of Mozilla. So I want to look for that word, those 6 letters, in my data over the last 15 minutes. And I'm going to click Start. So now the system is going through the records and looking at all the data over the last 15 minutes, finding all the data that has the string of Mozilla and then showing me those results down here and then the actual results. Now there's a lot of other things going on this screen, and let's go through what they are. So let's start with time. Within Sumo Logic, you have a couple of different ways to define time, and time is going to be important because it's going to help you define what time period of data you want to look at. There's a couple different ways to define time, and these are the ways. I can go in and choose this relative time period, and these are just time periods that we've defined that we said are pretty common. So let's look at data from the last 15 minutes, last 60 minutes, last 3 hours, etc. More commonly used periods of time. You also have a custom time range here where you can use more of a calendaring feature, and you could say, all right, show me data from March 3rd through March 11th, and from midnight on March 3rd to, 5 a.m. to March 11th, and get very specific in that way. The other syntax you can use, and you can see it right here, is this minus number and then a value. And so what I can do is I can say, let's say I want to look at the last 45 minutes of data, show me minus 45M. I want to look at the last 4 days of data, minus 4D. I can even use this to define a time period. So what I can say is, let's say I want to look at minus 45 to minus 30M, where I'm saying, go back 45 minutes ago and grab that 15-minute period. So from the last 45 minutes to the last 30 minutes, that 15-minute window, I want to use those dates and time as the searching feature here, or time feature here. The other option I have, because I want to give you one more option, is this use receipt time. Now, when we were using this time up here and not using receipt time, basically the log messages have a time in them, or should have a time in there, and we're extracting that time, and then we're using that time to display the results to you. But you can also use this receipt time. And what this does, and let me mouse over it and hopefully you can read it, it says search for messages based on when they were received, not by the dates parsed from them. And so what that means is, rather than using the date or time that's being parsed or extracted from the log message, use the time of when the message itself was actually received or ingested into the system. And so the difference here is, let's say you have your last 6 months worth of data. So you have last 6 months, last 5 months, you have all this data in the system. And you ingest it into Sumo Logic at this very moment. So bam, right now you ingest all that data. If you don't reuse receipt time, you can search for the last 6 months, the last 3 months, the last 4 months. You can search for all those different time periods. However, if you use receipt time, you would basically say, show me all the data that was ingested at this very moment that just happened 30 seconds ago. And then that would show you all the data. So it's just dependent on, do you want to search on the data based on when the date is in the log message, or based on the date of when the log message came into Sumo Logic? And there's valid reasons to use both. So, you may use one over the other, but certainly want to point out both of them. Over here, this kind of top middle-ish bar here, let's go over these options. So one option is this little star guy, which is going to allow you to favorite your queries. So as you create your queries, you can favorite them as well as save them. This is important because if you want to utilize those queries later, you're going to want to save them. And then the favorite allows you to use the star icon so that you can very easily see those things that you've favorited and quick access to. So like a bookmark. You have a share option here. Sharing is very important in the Sumo Logic environment. I guess it's very important in the world as well. But in Sumo, we consider the sharing option an important tool, because the idea behind it is, let's say you've gone ahead and you've created a query, and you go through and you take the time, you create this query, and it's really great. It's producing these results that are going to be helpful for you. Well, it's probably going to be helpful for somebody else in your organization. So we would encourage you to share that query with them, and that way they can use what you've created and either take that query and use it straight away and just continue on, or even use what you create as a template, and maybe you set up the framework of what they need to do, but they're going to take that query and modify it and do something else with it. So sharing is important. Now you might think to yourself, well, that's okay, I agree, sharing is important. I'm just going to take my query and cut it and paste it into Slack or into an email, and that's how I'm going to share my query with somebody else. And you certainly can do that. The problem is twofold with doing so. The first is we use a pipe character to separate lines, and we haven't done separate lines yet, but we will. And we found that some systems will strip out a pipe. We've noticed that in Slack, for example. So if you take your query that has pipes, paste it in, and send it to somebody else on your team, and it strips out those pipes, and they take that query and paste it into their Sumo Logic instance, it might not work. And now they're going to have to go through the troubleshooting of, well, why isn't there a pipe? And it actually might, potentially could add more work to them. So while you could do it that way, that's not the best way. The other disadvantage was copying the query and pasting it into a email or search window or some other place, is you lose some of the aspects associated with the query, such as time and things like that. So what we encourage you to do is use this code snippet here. So you would just go to share, and you would go to this code snippet here and copy it. You can then take that code snippet, paste it into a browser or another browser, so anybody that has Sumo Logic access, paste it in, and then when they run this, they will get the query exactly as you intended with the time periods defined and everything. So this provides a more kind of apples to apples sharing of queries versus if you do it without the share code snippet, you could lose some things. If you ever work with our support team or customer success team in troubleshooting a query, this is how they'll ask you to share the query, because it will provide the exact mirror kind of view of what you're looking at with that query. So code snippet, good. Let's see, pinning. So what the pin feature allows you to do is create a query and start it. And let's say you have a query that's going to run for a while. Now, what a while is, that's going to vary from every person, but let's say you run a query and it takes a while to run. Well, with the pin feature, what this will allow you to do is start a query, run it, pin it, and then let the system continue to run that query in the background. You can then close your Sumo Logic instance. You can log out of your browser. You can shut down your device. The next time you log into Sumo Logic, you could then or will have the results of that query waiting for you. Or if the query really needed a long time to run, it would still be running and then would finish up. So where this is really helpful is, let's say it comes down to the end of the day and you have this one query you need to run and get the results, and then you're ready to finish the day, but this query is going to take a while. It's looking through terabytes of data over a long time period. So you could go ahead, start the query, pin it, go home, commute. Once you get home, log into Sumo Logic at home, open up your browser, and then those results will be waiting for you, and then do what you will with those results. So pinning is a helpful feature for that reason. And then we have Livetail. I'm going to skip over Livetail just for a moment. I'll come back to it a little bit later. It's a helpful feature, but I'll just show it in a different context in a few more moments. In the middle of the screen, you have this histogram. So what this histogram is showing us is the amount or number of messages that match our query. So in this case, we were running a query, and let's just get to the same page. So we were running a query for Mozilla for the last 15 minutes, and we have 104,000 results. Well, what we're doing with this histogram is we're taking that 15-minute window and breaking it into logical time chunks. So in this case, 1-minute buckets, and then showing the number of log messages that match that. So what we see is, of those 104,000 messages over the last 15 minutes, from 6:29 to 6:30, there were just about 7,000 log messages that had Mozilla. From 6:30 to 6:31, there were a little less, or a little more, and so on and so forth. In some places, this histogram is really helpful to see the amount of messages. In other places, it's not. So I do periodically hide it, and would encourage you to hide it when you don't need it. But it's there for you at least. Down here, right in this middle, we see the number of results. So this is going to be the number of results that match our log query. So over the last 15 minutes, there have been 104,000 results that have the word Mozilla in it. And then down below, we see the log messages themselves. So we see that of the 104,000 messages, there were 4,100 pages. And then for each page, we see, I think there's about 25 results. And we see each log message, the raw log message. So here's the first log message that had the word Mozilla in it. Second log message, Mozilla, so on and so forth. I do have this feature on this bottom left-hand side called a field browser. But I'm going to skip over that just for a few moments. I want to kind of come back to it and reintroduce it in a different way. So we'll get to it. And it's a really important feature, but I just want to bring it in, like I said, in a different way. So let's go ahead and continue on. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Let me grab. Actually, let's go ahead and just do a new window. Actually, I can use this one. Sorry, a little indecisive this morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand my search out and actually limit my search in a way and say, I just want to look at a specific source category of data. So as I was alluding to earlier, the source category is going to provide me a way to describe my data to my users. And so let's say I want to start to look at Apache data. So I'm going to say specify the source category. The search ahead is going to help me here, so that makes typing a little bit easier. And I'm going to specify the source category I want to use. And this is the one I alluded to earlier of Labs Apache Access. And so what this is showing me, as I described earlier, but now you can visually see it, is this is showing me my Lab Apache Access data. And so with this, I can go ahead and start to locate a subset of data. So now I'm going to search for the Mozilla string, but only within my Apache data. And so now when I click start, I'm going to have less results because I'm looking at a subset of data. And so now I have just about 50,000 results. And I have the results down here. So for each Apache access log message that has the word Mozilla, I have a line. So here's the first one, here's the second one, and so on and so forth. Now I'm just looking at Apache access data. And Apache access data, if you're not aware, is web server data, essentially. So this is going to be data of you go to a website, the transaction or the information about that connection is going to be revealed in these Apache access logs. Now, within these logs, there's going to be valuable information that is going to be helpful to me. And so I can see some of that information in here visually. So I see, for example, here's an IP address at the very front. Oh, that might be helpful. Here is time and date information. That certainly might be helpful at some point. Here is a status code. Status codes are going to be helpful, particularly for today, in that we'll use them to look at good connections versus bad connections. And so a status code, if you've ever gone to a website, which of course you have, and you've gotten a page cannot be found or file not found, which I'm sure you have, you've probably gotten a status code of 404, indicating well, file not found or page not found. That would be a bad status code. A 200 status code would be a successful connection. And so we'll play with these a little bit. You don't need to specifically know what a 304 is, a 302. That's not relevant for today. But this status code, this field here of information is showing us valuable information that we might need to utilize later. So while we can visually see some stuff going on in the log message, we need to tell the system how to locate this. The system doesn't know how to find a IP address. It doesn't know how to find a status code. And so we need to tell it how to do so. And so how are we going to do that? Well, we have a couple different ways to do that. And let me grab one of them right here. So the first way we're going to go ahead and start to look at these fields of data is to parse out using regex. Now, you may have used regex before. If you've probably used regex before, you probably don't have a warm, fuzzy feeling about it. However, regardless, the system does support regex, and so I want to show it in this use case. There are going to be other ways to do this that we would actually recommend over regex for simplicity, but if you're comfortable using regex, this would be, you certainly can go ahead and use it. And so what am I talking about with regex? What would this do? So regex, or regular expressions, is a pattern matching system. And what we're doing with this, and it's not a Sumo logic thing, it's an international standard, I think, at this point. And this second line is having us go ahead through our system, through our log messages, and grabbing data that matches this pattern. So the way this second line reads is, we're going to go ahead and parse, and what parsing means, and it actually says here, we're going to extract complex data to create field labels. So we're going to take a portion of the log message, parse it out, and turn it into a field, and then we can start to look at those fields to go ahead and look at our sets of data. So we're basically saying use regex to parse out the data and turn it into a field label. The field label we're going to turn it into, in this case, will be called IP address, or specifically IP_address. And the way the system is going to look for an IP address is to use this pattern of number.number.number.number. And more specifically, what this is saying is look for a digit with 1 to 3 characters, that digit with 1 to 3 characters, digit 1 to 3 characters, 3 characters. So it's telling the system, hey, if you see that pattern, identify that as an IP address. And so I'm going to start the query right now. The system is now going through each log message and saying, can I find number.number.number.number? Yeah, I can, and here's that value. So now we've extracted these IP addresses out, and now we can start to utilize these IP addresses in a query. Now that's great. That's a very important feature. But now let's take a step back and say, let's say you don't want to use regex. I'm going to go ahead and comment this line off, meaning I'm going to put 2 backslashes. And what this is telling the system is it's as if the second line does not exist. So now when I start this query, I'm back to just having the first line run, and it says the second line doesn't exist. So now we're back to square one. We have this log message. We have probably valuable information in there, but we now need to tell the system how to locate that valuable information. So how are we going to do that? Not using regex. Well, in this case, we're going to use a feature that we call parse UI, and it's parsing parse anchor as well. But let me show you what it is. So here we can use the UI to help us with parsing. So I'm going to take one of these log messages and I'm going to highlight them. The cool thing about log messages, as cool as they can be, is the log message is going to be standard. So an Apache Access message will be an Apache Access message. It's going to be in the same format. And so I can start to take this log message and piece out different aspects of it and use that throughout my query. So let me show you, and that will help. So here, for example, we have an IP address, this first portion. Well, I can highlight this portion here, click to extract this value. It's going to turn into a star, and now give that field a name. So I can go ahead and call this an IP address. It needs to be one name, no spaces. And you should use terminology that's going to make sense to you and your peers. So with the idea that you may share this. So you should call it an IP. You should call it an IP address. You probably wouldn't want to call it a unique identification number, unless that's a common terminology in your environment, which in that case you would want to. So use a name that makes sense to you, makes sense to others. And I'm going to continue through. Now here I have time information in between these brackets. I could go ahead and say this is the year, this is the month, this is the day, this is the hour, and so on and so forth. But in this case, particularly for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to take this whole thing and I'm just going to call it a timestamp. So I'm going to do comma, timestamp. And I'm just going to continue on here. So I'm going to take this guy right here, and this will be the URL. I'm going to take this guy right here. This will be that status code that we discussed a moment ago. And I'm going to take this guy right here. I'll call that the size. So this will be the size, kind of the size of the transaction. And then, actually, let me finish this off. I'm halfway through it. This guy right here is the refer. Once again, you don't need to know these specific fields. And then this is the user agent. User agent is helpful to, when you go to a website, certain information about you and your identity is revealed. So with the user agent, it's going to show information about your browser type, maybe your language, your time zone, those type of things that can then help deliver content to you in a better way. So I'm going to click submit. What's happened now is that parse statement is now on the second or third, and I guess it stretches over to the fourth line a little bit. But essentially, the system is now going to use this pattern to identify these fields. So the system is going to look at the log message. The very first thing in the log message it finds, it's going to call an IP address. It's going to look for a space. It's going to look for a dash. It's going to look for a space. It's going to look for a dash. It's going to look for a space. It's going to look for an open bracket. Whatever it finds in that open bracket, it's going to call timestamp, and so on and so forth. So now when I click start, I should get about 7 new fields created. And let's verify I do. And I did. So now I have a field for IP address. I have a field for size, field for status code, et cetera, et cetera. And now I can start to utilize those in my query. Now, before I do, let's take one more step back. I'm going to comment off these lines again. So now we're back to square one. Once again, system sees these logs, but we need to tell it how to find these fields, how to parse this information out. Now, at this point, I'm going to introduce the field browser because it's a great place to do so. And what this field browser is showing us on the left-hand side, this portion over here, is it's showing us all the fields that the system has identified. And the system has identified a field for IP address. It's identified a field for status code, a field for user URL, for user agent, for size, for all these different fields that I just went through and told it how to find. But I didn't do that now. I commented that off. So I'm back to square one, but yet the system knows how to locate these fields. So how does the system know how to locate these fields? Well, the system's taking advantage of a feature called field extraction rules, or FER. And what that allows you as an administrator to do, or as a user even, is to set up a rule that when the data gets ingested, this rule automatically get applied. So I'm actually going to create a new one. I think that will help illustrate this use case a little bit better. So I'm going to add a field extraction rule, and I'll call the rule Apache 3 FER. I'm going to tell the system what scope of data I want this rule to apply to. So essentially, what set of data that gets ingested do I want this rule to apply to, and try to extract these fields. So I'm going to use the same one that I've used previously, which is going to be source category equals labs Apache/access. And now I need to tell the system what rule or what parsing rule I want to apply, because the system is kind of dumb on its own. So I need to tell it what I want it to extract, what I want it to parse through and find these fields. So I need to put a parse statement in here. But I can take advantage of the fact that log files are standard, and we know that. And so what we've done is we've provided a bunch of different templates for the more common log files out there. So I want to bring in my Apache Access data, so I'm going to use the Apache Access template. And this parse statement will now be applied to all new data that gets ingested for the source category of Lab Apache Access. So now going forward, the next time Lab Apache Access data gets ingested, the system's automatically going to say, all right, I see you're ingesting Lab Apache Access data, look for number.number.number.number. When you find that, call that a source IP. Then move on and look for this portion and call that the method. Call that the URL, call that the status code, and so on and so forth. When the system does that, now those fields are available to me, and now I can utilize those fields in my query. So here, for example, I have a field for status code. If I want to go ahead and now use that field, I can go ahead and do so. So now if I want to go ahead and count by status code, well, very clearly, I just do count by status code. And now when I click start, I'm going to have a new kind of view here. Since I'm doing a count, which is a mathematical operation, granted it's not the most advanced mathematical operator in the world, but it is math. This is where we're going ahead and starting to say, take the results and display them in this aggregates tab. So essentially take the results from that math and create a new tab called aggregates with those results. I still have access to my original log messages, but now I have my original log messages and the results of that math as well. So two different views here. And now I can start to continue on with my queries. So as we're looking at right now, we're looking at the last 15 minutes of data that have the status codes in it. So we'll see over the last 15 minutes, there's been 32,000 status code, 200 status codes, 6,304 status codes, and so on and so forth. Now, this is an okay way to view my data, but let's say I want to start to look at trends over time. Instead of looking at just the last 15 minutes, what if I want to count these status codes over time in 1-minute increments? So I want to see all the status codes from 650, from 649, 648, and so on. So how do I do that? I'm just going to add one more line into my query. And the line I'm going to add is the time slice operator. As I start to type pretty much anything in the system is going to search ahead and find the operator, or try to guess what operator I'm using, and also give me a little context of what that operator will do. So as I'm typing time slice, I see the description of segment data by time periods or bucketed over time range. And so it even gives me examples of the context or syntax that I need to utilize. And so I'm going to say time slice 1 minute. And so what this is telling the system is take my 15 minutes worth of data and break it up into 15 buckets of 1 minute each. So 649, 648, 647. And then I'm going to need to count by those results of the time slice. So here I'm saying take those and now count them. So now I'm going to count by the time slice as well as the status code at the same time. And when I run this, now my results are going to look a little different, because now I'm going to have my time slice as part of the result set. So now I see at 639, so essentially about 639 to 640, there were 129 404s. At 645 to 646, there were 119 404s, so on and so forth. Now, by default, the system does not put them in chronological order, so let's go ahead and do so. So if we want to order these time slices, we're just going to do another line that says order by time slice. And then let's go ahead and say put them in ascending order versus descending order. Now I have my results. I'm going to get rid of the histogram because it's just noise here. And now I have all my times grouped together. So here are my 637s, here are my 638s, my 639s, and so on and so forth. Now this is good but it's not a great way to interpret this data. It's kind of difficult. I could, if I want to say, look at all my 404s, I could say, all right, here are my 404s at 637, here are my 404s at 638, but that's not a good way to display the data. So what I want to do is I want to present this in a better way to view this. And what I want to do is I want to take this data and transpose it. And transposing is going to take the data and turn it into an Excel look and feel, where I'm going to have rows and columns. So I'm going to go ahead and do a new line and say I want to transpose. And once again, the system is going to provide me some context of the syntax that I should utilize. So I'm going to say, okay, I want my row to be made up of my time slices, and I want my column to be made up of my status codes. And now when I run this, what I have is what I requested, an Excel look and feel, where I have on the left-hand side going down, I have my times. On the top, I have my columns for the status codes. And then at the cross intersection, I have the count. So now if I want to see the 404s, I can see, it started at 69, went to 129, stayed at 129, went down, went up, I can see those kind of results in there. Now, this is good, once again, or it's much better, but we can still do even a little bit more with it. And what we can do is we can turn this data into a chart. And the system's going to let us know that we have these other charting options available. So by default, we'll be put in a table or tabular view. But let's say we want to express this data in a different way. We want to express it in a bar chart. We can. Maybe a column chart is a better way to express it. Maybe a line chart. We have these different ways to express this data. And so you'll find the one that kind of works for you. And so, all right, this line chart, this is a better way to express my data. And with this, I can see, for example, my 200 status codes. I see it goes up, it goes down. I really see those peaks and valleys. I have my 304 down here, and I still see the peaks and valleys. It's kind of a little more level, but I can still see them. But the bottom portion of this chart, I can't really make out. These purple, this red, this yellow line, I can't really see them very well. So what I want to do is I want to clean up this chart. And I have two different ways to handle this. What I can do is I can go to the legend itself and say, all right, don't show me 200s, don't show me 304s. And now I see everything expressed a little bit better because the scale is now adjusted. And now I can see those peaks and valleys much clearer defined. The other way to handle this scenario would be to go into the query itself and say, only show me where the status code is equal to 200 or status code is equal to 304. And since I want to exclude those, I put an exclamation point at the front of this. And what this line is saying is show me all the status code except those that are equal to 200 or 304. And now when I run this, now I get my chart expressed in a better scale because I'm excluding those bigger values. And now I can see the chart a lot more clear. So just another way to take our data or your data and clean it up a little bit. Let's see, what else do we want to show? A couple more things in here. We have the ability, and I should have pointed this out earlier, although now's a good time as any, to export your results into a text file. So I can take my results here, and I can go ahead and export them. And where this becomes helpful is I can use Sumo Logic to parse out my data, export it out, and then use those fields in another environment. So let's say I have these Apache log messages or any type of data. I can go ahead and ingest it into Sumo Logic. We'll create a parse statement via regex, via parse UI, however I want to do it, that tells the system, hey, parse out a status code, parse out a source IP, parse out the, what else do we want to parse out? The URL, all these different fields. I can then extract this information or export this information and then import it into another system. And now the new system that gets this data will clearly know, hey, this is a status code, this is a source IP, and be able to take advantage of these fields. So while that is certainly not the primary use case of using Sumo Logic to parse out your data before you bring it into another environment, you certainly can, and we do have many customers that do so. So just wanted to point that out as kind of another kind of little helpful feature of Sumo Logic. Let's go ahead and jump into a operator. Let's look specifically at, let's see, do I have an outlier here? Yeah, let's look at outliers. So, yeah, I can use this example. Okay, so what I want to do with this example here is I want to look at, so let me comment a few of these lines off, and let me describe this query line by line, and then explain what the outlier is about to do. So what I'm doing with the first line is I'm saying, look for Apache access data and look for only those log messages that have a status code of 404. Now, the reason I can put the status code up here and not have a parse statement for the status code is because I'm using the field extraction rule. The system knows how to locate a status code, and so I can very clearly tell it, pull only those status codes with a 404. I'm then going to go ahead and implement my time slice operator to say of my data, and I'm going to use the last 60 minutes just to get a little bit more data, look for or break the data up into time slice buckets. So show me the data at 601, at 602, etc. And then I'm going to count the status codes. So I'm going to take all the status codes and count them up, counting being the mathematical operator. And I'm going to call the results of that count error count and do it by time slice. So now when I run this, I see at 610, for example, there are 109 error counts or 109 404s. At 622, there were 118, and so on and so forth. Now, are 109 error counts or 109 404s for a 1 minute period of time a lot or a little? I don't know. It's hard to say. It depends on other variables. And so what I can have is the system start to help me in determining whether that's a large number or a number that's outside the norm or not. And so that's where I'm going to use this last line here and use the outlier operator. Now with this outlier operator, I'm saying take the error count and determine the outlier equation using this math. I'm going to be a little vague on the math, but I'll refer to it a few times. So I'll start to explain it as we go through it. And so I'm going to start this right now. And so what the system is doing is the system is taking the math and using it to determine an acceptable range, an acceptable threshold, and upper and lower limits. So the system's saying, all right, at 6 o'clock, based on the math, I believe that the upper and lower limits should be 66 to 202. If the number or the error count is within that range, that's considered acceptable and normal, and all is good. The math here that I've been describing has a couple components to it. And this is all thoroughly documented. So I'll give a brief description, but if you want more information about it, just go into the docs and it's all there. But with the math, basically we're saying how many trailing data points do we want to use? How many standard deviations do we want to use to determine this threshold? And these are all customizable. And so let me see here. And so then the next period of time occurs. So that's 601. Based on the math, now the number's a little bit different because the amount of trailing data points are going to be different. But now the range is 65 to 200, and we're still within that range. Now let's fast forward a little bit, and let's see if I have any outliers in here. Let me expand my search out just a little bit more. Okay, here we go. So at 4:37 a.m., and I expanded my search to the last 3 hours, so that's why we're going back a little bit further in time, the system found 184 404s. Using the math, the system determined the range, an acceptable range, to be 95 to 178. Well, 184 is outside that range, which means during that time period, the amount of 404s is greater than what's expected. Now I can see that here in this view. I see this error count indicator indicating 1, which means an error count indicator has kind of been flagged. But this may not be the best way to express my data. And so over here, I have another way to express it. I can use a line chart. If I click on the line chart, now I see this expressed much better. And hopefully you can see this clearly. Sometimes this in Zoom, the color of the cloud does not show up for some reason. But what I see here are 3 components. I see the dark blue line representing the actual error count for the minute, so the amount of 404s for that 1 minute period. I see this light blue cloud that I'm hoping you can see that's indicating, based on the math, this is the threshold. This is the upper and lower limit that's considered to be acceptable, if you will. And then I see this little, these triangles, which indicate the outlier themselves, which are letting me know during this 1 minute period, the amount of 404s was outside the range that's expected. And so what this is showing me now is over the last 3 hours, there's been 3 times the amount of 404s are greater than expected. And now this is helpful to know because this is letting me know something out of the ordinary has occurred. Now, what you'll be able to do, and I don't think we'll really get into it too much today, although we will go into alerts in a little bit, but then you can start to create an alert on this. So the next time the amount of 404s is greater than what the system is expecting, you can go ahead and be notified and get a notification of that without sitting in Sumo Logic, which, as we discussed earlier, is certainly a good thing, helpful feature of Sumo Logic. The math here is adjustable, and so I'm being a little vague with it, but let's look at it real quickly. With this threshold, for example, this is saying the amount of standard deviations that are going to be used to describe the outlier. Well, I can change this. So let's say I want to use less standard deviations. I only want to use 2. Now the equation that's used to determine the outlier has changed, and now it's showing me that there were a lot more outliers because the way I'm determining outliers is different. And so I'm still looking at the same set of data, but now I see over the last 3 hours, there's been about 12 or so outliers in here. And so with the outlier, and more specifically with the math to calculate the outlier, you're going to want to look at a kind of a common period of time where things are normal, and then go ahead and decide, okay, what is an acceptable range for this stuff? Then once you've decided that, then anything that becomes outside that norm, you would then be notified upon. So you will want to kind of play around with these values to figure out what works for you, but certainly wanted to show you the outlier feature. It's a very helpful feature, something we'll discuss if you're joining later. We'll go into it again in level 2. Just a really great way to have the system help you in determining what's normal and more importantly, what's not. Let's go ahead and look at, let's see, what should we do next? Let's go ahead and look at log reduce and log compare. We looked at log reduce earlier, but let's go ahead and look at them together. So I'm going to look at a different set of data. This is going to be snort data, which is security data. You don't really need to know specifics about it, but let me just show you the data and then show you how we can use these features to help us. So I'm looking at security data. I'm going to look at it for the last 15 minutes, fine. So what this is showing me is different security events, and snort is not a Sumo Logic thing either. It's just data that we've collected for an example. And this is showing me security events that have taken place. So here I see classification web application attack. Here I see classification attempted information leak, another attempted information leak, and a bunch of different other classifications of security events that have taken place over the last 15 minutes. Now there's 1,300 security events over the last 15 minutes. Now, what if I want to get a better understanding of those security events that have taken place? Well, once again, I could manually go through 56 pages and see, all right, well, here was this attempt, here was this attempt. But I want to get a better picture, kind of an overall view of what's been going on in the system. So this is where I'm going to use log reduce once again. And so by clicking log reduce, I'm taking these 1,500 messages or so and grouping them together based on patterns. And so now what I see is over the last 15 minutes, there were 779 attempted information leaks, 156 classifications of sensitive data, 78 detection of a network scan, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is good to know that there have been just about 800 classifications of attempted information leaks over the last 15 minutes. Now, is that a lot or a little attempted information leaks? I don't know. It's hard to say. Certainly if you're a small company, that 800 of those sounds like a lot. If you're at Google, it probably isn't a lot. But I need some better information to be able to really compare this. And so that's where I'm going to use, as you might guess, log compare. What log compare is going to allow me to do is basically do a log reduce between 2 different time periods. And by default, it's going to choose a 24-hour time period. And so what I'm doing here is I'm basically saying, look at my data from about 6:50 to 7 o'clock today, group all the classifications together in patterns, and showed me the results. And then go back 24 hours, so yesterday from 6:51 to 7 o'clock, group all those patterns together and show me those as well, and then show me the difference. So now what I see is between yesterday and today, there's been an increase by 0.25% of attempted information leaks. Conversely, there's been a decrease by 20% of attempted denial services. I even see there's been this format of attempted denial of service today meaning that there's a new one today where yesterday during this time period, there was not one of these. And so what log compare allows me to do is take these different groupings of log reduced data and compare it. Well, maybe it doesn't make much sense to compare yesterday to today. Maybe I'm more a week over week guy. Well, I can do -7D, and now I'm comparing today from 6:50 to 7:05 to last Tuesday from 6:50 to 7:05. And so this is really a nice way that I can start to look at that. The other thing I'll be able to see are things that are gone, which is this is showing me last week, so last Tuesday from 6:50 to 7:05, a network Trojan was detected where this week there wasn't, or this time period there wasn't, which is good. We don't have any network Trojans where last week we did. So log reduces and log compare are going to be used together, not necessarily together, although log compare will be. Log compare is basically a log reduce with a time component added to it. But it's going to be a way for you to take a bunch of data and distill it down, and we call it looking for like a needle in the haystack, where it's going to allow you to go through 800,000 log messages and have them just displayed in maybe 2 pages of data. So much easier way to go through your data. Let's go through, let's do LiveTail right now. So I'm going to take this query, I'm going to get rid of the log reduce log compare portion and just go back to looking at this snort data, this security data. Now, when I do a query like this, I'm looking at, if you will, old data. Then not old data in a bad way, but I'm looking at data that occurred from the last 15 minutes. But what if I want to look at live data as it gets ingested into the system? That's where LiveTail is going to help me. I can access LiveTail in 2 different ways. I can click on it, LiveTail right here, and it will take me into the LiveTail interface. And what this is now going to show me is as snort data gets ingested, it will be displayed on the screen. And here we go. So now we're starting to see this data that's being ingested at this very moment. So LiveTail is going to be a helpful feature if you want to see data that's being ingested into Sumo Logic. Maybe you start ingestion and you want to verify your data is coming into Sumo Logic. Well, LiveTail will be a good way to do it because you can see in live time, that data that comes in. It's basically the same thing as a tail-f function in a Linux Unix environment. For some users, this will be a very helpful feature. We have people that love this LiveTail feature. I think it's the greatest thing we've ever added. And we have other customers that will never look at this again. So I want to point it out, show you it. If you think it's going to be useful, please do use it. If you don't, at least now you know it's where it is. We do have a command line interface for this as well, I should have mentioned. So if you want to still use LiveTail, but not in Sumo Logic, if you want to run it in that Linux environment, you can go ahead and do so. The other thing I would kind of warn you about this is this is going to show all the data that's being ingested. Now, in this case, I'm in a lab environment, so we're just ingesting a few log messages each second, excuse me. But in your environment, you could imagine that you're ingesting gigabytes at a time. And so the screen can start to look like the Matrix, where it's just green letters flying by and gets very noisy. Now, there is a pause feature. You can search by keyword, but just wanted to let you know that it can get a little noisy as well. But at least now you know where it is, and if you never ever need to use it, you know how to get to it. Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to our outlier. So I've created this outlier dashboard, or this query, and as a result, I have this chart down here. Now, let's say this chart, this is a great chart. I'm proud of this chart. It's displaying this information in a helpful way. And now I want to share this data with other people, expressing the importance of sharing once again. How do I do this? Very simply, I'm going to create a dashboard out of this data, and I'm just going to click the Add to Dashboard button. When I do, I'm going to tell the system what dashboard I want to utilize. Maybe I have an existing dashboard that I want to add this panel to. In this case, I'm just going to create a new one, and I'm just going to use my initials just to get something in there. And I'm going to click Add. At this point, I've now created a dashboard that has, actually I have another panel in here from last week I did this. So I now have this dashboard. Now I have my outlier, I have this other window, this query I created last week. And I now have the ability to modify this dashboard in regards to look and feel. So maybe I want to put this guy to the left, this guy to the right, expand this down. I can add a text panel. This will be helpful in possibly describing what this dashboard is doing. So test, this is showing, I don't know, 404s or something like that. I can move this around, get it to the look and feel that you want that helps you and your users understand the data. All right, well, it's not the best. All right, whatever. This is the way I want to express my data. I'm proud of this view. I know it's not the best, but for now, it's fine. So now that I've created this dashboard, now I can go ahead and share this out in the value of sharing. But you can share it out in a couple different ways, and I want to show you the ways, and also want to show you kind of one way that I want you to notice and be aware of the pros and cons of it. So let's say I want to share this out. How do I do it? Well, I have a share icon. Very simple. I'm going to click on it. Now I'm going to start to describe who do I want to share this data with, and I have a couple different ways to do it. I can share it with a specific individual, a specific user. So I can go ahead and say, all right, I want to share this with Brian, and I want to share this with Dan, and I want to have them be able to edit this or view access or have some permissions as far as access controls. I can also say I want to share this with a specific role. So maybe I want to share this with just my administrators and only my analysts. And within Sumo Logic, we have the idea of RBAC or role-based access control, where you can start to go in and do exactly that and say, I want to share with these people and not these people, and these people can access this set of data, these people can't. We don't go into RBAC too much more detail today, but you do have that ability. And you can ultimately just say, I want to share this with everybody. So a bunch of different ways to say, who do you want to share it with? The other option you have, however, is this shareable URL here. And I just want to discuss the pros and cons of using this, because this can be a powerful feature. But let me show you how to use it. What this feature is going to allow you to do, and this is assuming your administrator allows you to, your administrator can very quickly say, I don't want this to be allowed. But what you can do is, if he's allowing this, you can go ahead and take this URL and then share this with anybody in the world, regardless of if they have Sumo Logic access or not. What they can then do is take that URL, paste it into their browser, and then, didn't grab it. Let me grab it, sorry. And then they will be able to have a view-only view of this dashboard without even needing a Sumo Logic username and password to get in. So you can share this with somebody who might not have a Sumo Logic username and password, and they can have a view into your environment, into your panels, but not get the actual logs, not even get the underlying queries, but they can still see, all right, things were going up and then things drop. And so this can be a way that you can share things with people that don't have a Sumo Logic account, maybe partners, maybe vendors, third parties, whoever you think is going to be helpful to gain this information. Now, the problem with this is that if your administrator allows you, anybody in the world that gets this URL can view that data or view that dashboard, including your competitors and other people that you might not want to have access to. So that's why this is really powerful. Do you want anybody that gets this URL to be able to view your data? Yes or no? Your administrator, like I said, can just say no to that right away. But you also have the ability to decide to allow this to be visible to either the world, which is what I described, or you can create a whitelist of IPs where you could say, I only want people coming from the IP of our New York office and our partner's Chicago office. If they're coming from that IP and they get this URL, they can view that dashboard perfectly fine. If they're not coming from those two locations, they can't. So you can start to then segment and say, all right, I don't want everybody to have access to this. So I just wanted to point this out because it is, it can be used for good or evil, if you will. And so I just want to point out that, like I said, the pros and cons of that. All right, a couple more things to go over, and then we'll do a little lab work here. So let's see, really just a couple more things. Let's go over apps real quickly. So within Sumo Logic, you have the ability to ingest your data. And when you ingest your data, you're going to need to start to create these queries to start to slice your data, which is, as we discussed, can be a little bit daunting. This screen, can be a bit intimidating. And so what we want to do is we want to provide you and your users an easier way to start to dig into your data. And that's where we developed the app catalog to do so. Now, everybody uses the term app in a different way, and I'm sure we use it a little bit differently as well. Now, when we say app, what we're referring to is an outside source of data and the fact that we're going to provide some queries and dashboards to you that you can utilize. And the reason we can do this is because, as I discussed earlier, log files follow a standard format. So an Apache access will always be in the same format, or 99.99% of the time it will be. And so what we can do is we can say, all right, we know what an Apache access message is going to look like. let's provide you some queries and dashboards that will take advantage of the patterns that exist with them and provide those to you without having you do any of the heavy lifting to get there. So let's go ahead and start with one. So let's say I have my Apache data. So let me go ahead and look for the Apache app. And we have about, I was going to say 50, I think we probably have about 75 different apps by now. And here's my Apache one, so I'm going to click on it. If I click on Preview Dashboards, this is going to provide me a screenshot, not my actual data, but just a picture of what type of data it can, or what type of graphs and dashboards it can provide to me. And so, this visitor location, that's kind of cool. It's going to give me this browser information based on operating system. All right, that's pretty cool. All right, I want that. How do I get it? Very simply, I'm going to go to Add to Library. I'm going to give the app a name. Typically, you could keep the name that the app has already. In this case, I'm just going to put some numbers just because I'm in a lab environment and we're going to share these credentials. And then I'm going to specify the set of data I want to utilize. So in this case, I want to use my lab/Apache/access data. And the type ahead will help me as well, so I don't even need to type all that out if I don't want to. And I'm going to click Add to Library. At this point, the system is taking our Apache Access data. It's taking these queries that Sumo Logic has created and smushing them all together, if you will, for lack of a better phrase. And now I have all these different views. So let's say I want to go to the Apache overview. Now I am looking at my Apache data with a Sumo Logic dashboard that we've created. And so now I have a view of my visitor location, traffic distribution, all this information about my Apache Access data, and I didn't have to write a single line of code to get that. And I can take these and I can share them out with somebody, and I can share this with my manager and show him, or her, this is where our visitors are coming from, and they can put this map on a big command center environment and be able to utilize it for that. Or maybe I want to look at the, what was that other one, Apache visitor location. Let's see, where's Apache visitor location? And now, although this is showing visitor location again, now I have these different views of my worldwide visitors, my US visitors, visitors by US state, all this different information. And once again, I didn't write any code to get it, but I'm still able to use Sumo Logic to benefit in viewing my data and what it's expressing to me. So apps are really a great way as a starting point to get into your data and also to see what Sumo Logic is providing to you. The other way that they're helpful is as a template to see how Sumo Logic is doing a query. So for example, let's say this map, this map's really cool. Well, how did Sumo Logic create it? If I click this little icon here that says show in search, it's going to show in search the query. And so now I see the query that was utilized to create this. And so here I see the source category. Here I see the lookup table that was used to grab that geographic information. Here's the count and all this other stuff to create this query. And, maybe I learn from it. Maybe I modify this query for my own needs and, continue on. So apps really helpful as a starting place, or just to see what Sumo Logic can provide to you for your new set of data that you might have ingested. Last thing I just want to show here is a feature of Save As, which is actually going to be scheduling a search. Let's find, let's see, I'm just seeing if I have a better example real fast. It doesn't actually matter. So let's go back here. So let's say I have any of these queries. Yeah, it doesn't matter which one. So I've created a query. Let me find one that at least makes sense. Okay, this query, sorry about that. So this query, and this is a query that we'll actually play with in the security. Yeah, I believe we do this in security. So what this query is doing is it's looking at my data for Snort. It's doing a time shift. So it's basically comparing my security events from yesterday to today, and it's showing me only those that are new. Now, what I can do with this is I can schedule this search to run periodically. So I go to Save As, I choose to schedule this search, and then I can have the search run, let's say, every 15 minutes. And now going forward, every 15 minutes, the system's going to let me know when there's a new security event that did not happen yesterday during that time period. And here's where I can start to configure that event, that notification. So earlier I showed, I started today off with showing the Slack message. Well, I can go ahead and choose what type of alert I want to send out. Do I want to send out an alert via email? Do I want to send an alert via ServiceNow if you're using that as a ticketing system, which is quite popular? Or webhook. So if I want to deliver a message via Slack or Discord or Twitter even, I can go ahead and do so. And so I would just specify who do I want this alert to go to, and then this alert will then be sent out periodically. And so the alerting mechanism, as discussed earlier, is just going to be a great way for you to provide insight to your system to people that may not have or need to log into Sumo Logic, but they can still understand what's going on. So, all right, cool. So let's see. Now let's go ahead and do some lab work. So let's go ahead and log in together and go through some scenarios. So let me go ahead and provide the credentials for you guys. Let's see here. They are, where are they? Let me just open up one more window. Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, so this is going to give you access to the training environment, and let me put this in the chat as well. So go ahead and log into this. Well, the website's going to be service.sumologic.com, which is where you would normally log in. And then we'll use the username of training+labs@sumologic.com. And then the password will be Sumo Labs, capital SUM0, capital LABS exclamation point. So I'll give you guys a moment or two to log into that. The training environment you're about to log into is a training environment. We have a bunch of different sources of data in there, which is going to be great for you to utilize both today and in the future. And so what we'll do is once we get in there, we'll go through some of the tutorial and actually give you a hands-on experience of doing many of the things I just did. So like I said, I'll give everybody a moment or two to log in. One thing you may notice if you haven't already, Sumo Logic doesn't play very well with having two tabs in one browser with two different sessions. So if you had logged in previously this morning with your corporate account in Chrome, for example, you'll either need to do a new like a new incognito window for this instance, or maybe just use Safari or Firefox or something else. So, I'll give everybody another moment or two to log in. All right, I think we'll go ahead and continue. The credentials are in the chat. And I'm just seeing if anybody's yelling. Yeah, nobody's, it looks like everyone's okay. So let's go ahead and continue. So once you log in, you'll be brought to this screen. And what we're going to do from here is we're going to go to the Learn tab. And then under Learn, we're going to go to the Using Sumo Logic tutorial and start with part 1, viewing data. So go ahead and click on part 1, viewing data, and that will open up another tab in your browser. So we'll have one tab for Sumo Logic. We'll have another tab for the lab, and well, I guess you'll have a third tab or a kind of a view to listen to me. So the way we're going to do these labs is I'll do them on my screen. You do them at your device, and we'll talk about why we're doing them and what the benefit is of them. So for this scenario, and I'm going to give everyone another moment or two to log in or get to the screen, but I'll just describe kind of the scenario we're about to start with. And this scenario is going to be pretty realistic. You now have access to a system, and now you need to start to do work into that system. Now, before you do, you're going to need to start to discover what is in that system and is available to you, and that's where we're going to start. And so we're going to start to see what data is in there, what things have people shared, and so let's just dive in. So part one, viewing data, the first step is signing in. Well, congratulations, you signed in, so we're on our way. But the next step is to see what data is available. And just like you're in the scenario, you now have access to the system. Well, what data is available to you, for you to query? Now, in the real world, you may be told by your manager, hey, I only want you to look at data in source category labs Apache Access. And in that case, it's pretty clear what data you're going to look at. But in this case, we can start to see what data is in the system that's available to us. And the first way we're going to do this is to look through the collection. Now, I alluded to collectors earlier, and what we're going to do now is look at the interface in Sumo Logic that shows the collectors functioning. So to do so, we're going to go to the black bar on the left-hand side of the screen. And within the black bar, we're going to go to Manage Data, and we're going to go to Collection. Now, in this case, you are able to see those collectors and whether they're up and running and those type of things. But in your environment, you may not, simply just based on the fact that your administrator just might say you can't view collection. So this may not work in the real world for you, just based on permissions and controls and things like that. But what we see in here are those collectors, so those devices or apps, if you will, that are, well, I don't want to use the app term, those things that are grabbing data and bringing it into Sumo Logic. And so what we can do is we can start to search in here. So let's say we want to look for Apache Access data. We can see, is there an Apache Access collector available? And so when we run just the Apache Access search and collection, we see there is lab Apache Access data. And we even see the collector here itself, and the collector is grabbing the data. We don't really need the specifics about that right now. It's a little higher level. But we can see that there is some Apache Access data in there, which is good. So that's one way to see what type of data is in the system. Go to the collection, to go to Manage Data, go to Collection, and then either look at the collectors or even search through them based on naming conventions. The other way to do it, though, is to simply write a query. It's a very simple query, but it's a query nonetheless. And so the query is right here, this middle portion of the screen. I'm just going to copy it and paste it in. So I'm going to do a new log search. So I'm going to either go to the home page and go to log search and click on that button, or go to the very top and go to new and log search. Same difference, but I'll just paste my query in. And what this query is going to do is it's going to then look for all the data. And from that data, it's going to count the log messages by source category. So now when I click start, it's going to look at all the data from the last 15 minutes, look for the source categories for each log message and group them together or count them together and show those results in the aggregates. So now I see that there were this many for this type of source of data, this many for that type of source of data. I can click on the count to just reorganize the count method and look at highest to lowest, lowest to highest. But looking highest to lowest, now I see that there were, over the last 15 minutes, almost 250,000 messages for VMware 6.5, 54,000 messages for Apache Access, so on and so forth. And so this is just a helpful way to see what data is available in the system. Now we're going to go ahead and continue on with our scenario here, and we're going to look for a shared dashboard. And hopefully there's one in here. Let's see if there is real fast. Okay, cool, there is. So what we're doing with this is the idea of we now have access to Sumo Logic. We see there's Apache Access data in there, and now we want to see, has somebody already done the heavy lifting for us? Has somebody created a dashboard that might be helpful, that shows things we're trying to express, and maybe we can just use it rather than taking the time now to create views into our data. Maybe somebody created a dashboard that has these views and did the heavy lifting already. Well, let's check. So we're going to go to the black bar. We're going to go to the library option, and the library option allows us to see those things that have been shared by other people. And then we're going to see, is there anything related to Apache Access in the library? Well, I see this Apache Access folder, and then I see all these different things in here. And so if I want to look at an Apache overview that somebody's created, I click on the Apache overview, and now I am viewing data about my system in this view, and I didn't have to do any typing, and I didn't even have to implement anything. I saw, hey, this guy created this already, and he's letting me look at it, and now I'm able to benefit from the work that somebody else did. So viewing data is certainly helpful. Then we're going to go ahead and install an app. So continuing on with the idea, we know there's Apache data in here. we see somebody did all this work, but let's see what Sumo Logic is going to provide us. So in this case, we're going to go to the app catalog. We're going to go to the app for Apache. I'm going to try and spell it correctly. We're going to grab the one with the feather because in this case, we're just interested in Apache data, not Apache Tomcat data. We're going to choose to add to library. When we do the app name, once again, we're going to need to put, in this case, you'll want to put your name, your initials, just something to distinguish it from someone else's. It doesn't really matter what you use, but just some way to distinguish it. And then you're going to specify the source category of your data, which once again will be labs/Apache/access. The system is now taking all that data, smushing it all together, and now providing us the results of that in the form of the app. So now it's taking all that. And so now I have my folder and I have all the dashboards and queries that the Sumo is providing us. From this screen, I don't know if you're familiar with the legend. It's pretty basic. The green with the white window panes kind of view, that's the view for dashboards. And then the orange with the 3 lines is indicative of a query or a log search specifically. So just for what the difference is there. All right, cool. Let's see, any questions about that? Let's see, it looks pretty clear for questions. So let's continue on. Okay. Oh, the question, there was a question about how to delete the app or the dashboard. So what you can do is you can go ahead and just go to the folder, go to the 3 dots, and then go to the one you created. So go to your personal. So let's say this one I just created, click on the 3 dots, and then go to delete, and then that will delete that folder, which would then delete all the dashboards in there. If I just wanted to delete the specific dashboard, maybe I created this visitor access type and I don't need it, I can just go to that and delete it there. So a couple ways to get rid of it. All right, cool. So let's go on to part 2. So part 2 is going to have a search for log data, which is now going to get us more in depth into the query language itself. Now for today, we're not going to get too deep, but giving you a basic framework is important. So we're going to create a query, and we're going to utilize this query that it provides to us. So we're just going to take the query, copy it, and then go to a new log search. So once again, new log search, and paste it in. And then click Start. And what this query is doing is, once again, is taking our Lab Apache access data. So we're saying, look at just the subset of data for this period of time. And from that subset of data, look only for the keyword of get. If the word get or the string get is in the log message, show it in the results and highlight that keyword in the results as well. So that's why we have get highlighted all down below. The word end is implied here. So you could write this query with the end or without it. It's going to give you the same results. So just kind of more personal style as you get more comfortable with the syntax in the query language. But now you have a query. So now let's build upon this a little bit more. So now we're going to go back into the lab. And now we're going to go ahead and start to parse out this data. So at this point, we're going to use the parse UI mechanism to do so. So we're going to highlight, and just to make sure everyone kind of is on the same page with this, we're going to go into the log message and we're going to highlight from the quote in get through the quote in the URL. So we're going to highlight those 6 pieces of information or so. So on my screen, I'm going to go from quote to get through, I already forgot where I was going to go through that URL, sorry. So we're going to do from here through here. So we're going to highlight that section, click off of it, and choose parse the selected text as the option. Now we're going to have that portion that we just highlighted pop up in the UI interface. And now we're going to start to go through this and label these sections as different fields. So what do we want to call these fields? Now the lab is going to tell us what to utilize. And so we're going to use the fields that are described down here. So we're going to create a field for URL, for status code, for size, and I think refer is the last one. So to do so, we're going to highlight the portion that we want to turn into a URL, which will be in between the get and the HTTP. Highlight it, click to extract the value. It's going to turn into a star, and now we need to give that star or that field a name, and we're going to call that a URL. We're going to take this 3-digit number, highlight it, click to extract this value, turn it to star, and call it comma status code. Take this guy, turn it to size. And then finally, grab the URL that exists in between the quotes and call that a refer and submit that. Once we're done with that, we should have this parse statement on the screen. And then when we run this query, the system will use this parse statement as the way to view or check to see, is there data in those fields? So it's going to look for the word get. It's going to look for a space. It's going to, whatever it finds after that word get and a space, it's going to call a URL. It's then going to look for another space. It's going to look for HTTP 1.1, quote, space, then that will find its size. So now when I click start, I should have these fields available to me. So now I have a field for size, a field for status code, URL, and refer. And now I can start to take these and utilize them in my query, which we'll do in just a second or two. So I'll give everybody just a moment or two to kind of catch up or make sure you get to this portion. Let's see, no questions. That's a good sign as well. And then what I can now do is start to utilize these in my query. Oh, actually, it wants us to save the search next. Sorry, I always jump ahead there. So at this point, we now have a query that has fields. It's not the most advanced query once again, but although it is much more advanced than the one we just did. So let's say, we've done this query where we want to save it because just saving is important. How do you do it? Saving is pretty easy. Click the Save As button. And then you would give the query or the thing you're going to save a name. Now, ideally, you'd want to provide a name that's going to be much more indicative of what you're about to save, because if you want to use this later, are you going to remember that this thing is called Search 19 versus Search 20? No, probably not. So you want to kind of call it, parsing fields from Apache or whatever. And also that way, when you share it with somebody, they'll very clearly know, okay, that's what this query is helping me with, versus just calling this query 84. It just doesn't provide much syntax to somebody. So now I've saved this query. And so now I'm going to go ahead and go to part 3, which is going to have us chart our data. So I'll click on part 3. So now what we're actually going to do is the same things. Actually, it'll be pretty much the same steps I did earlier, where we're going to first aggregate our search results. So with our query that we've done so far, we have parsed out a field called status code, and the system knows what a status code is. But now we need to tell it that we want to count by status codes. So to do so, we're just very explicitly going to use that syntax of count by status code. Is that clear? When we do this now, when we click start, the system is now going to take all those status codes and count them all up. And with the count, it's using the math, and it's giving us the results. So now we see over the last 15 minutes, there's been this many status codes over 200, this many status codes for 304, and so on. Next, we're going to transpose the results. So I'll give you guys a moment to do this step. But what this step is doing as a reminder is taking our data and just converting it in a different way to express it. Because right now, oh, wait, actually, we didn't do time slice. I'm sorry. I skipped over time slice. Sorry about that. So at this point, we're looking at our data just in a bucket of time. So we're seeing just our data for the last 15 minutes. But what if we want to look at that data in those time slices, those time increments of 1 minute each? This is where we'll use the time slice operator here. So to do this, we're going to do 2 changes to the query. We're going to add the time slice operator above the count. So we're going to do a shift enter to separate a line, and we're going to paste that guy in. And now we still need to use those results. So we're going to go ahead and adjust our count to include the time slice results. So we're going to do underscore time slice comma. Now when I run this, I'm going to get my time broken out into 1 minute segments. And in my results, I'm now counting by those 1 minute segments. And so now I see, the 404s at 7:39, there are 151 of them, and so on and so forth. Now, the next part, and this is the part that I jumped ahead to, is now we're going to transpose our data. So we have our data expressed in this view of line by line, but as described earlier, it's kind of hard to read. So a better way to express this would be to use the transpose to turn it into more of an Excel look and feel. And so that's what we're going to do with this line of code here. We can just grab that line, paste it in, Shift Enter. And now this line is saying, take our time slices, stick them on a row, take our status codes, stick them in a column, and then at the cross intersection are the values themselves. Now, the next portion of this lab is creating a chart. So as discussed, we have charting options and a wide variety of them. And so maybe you want to use the bar chart, maybe you want to use the column chart, line chart, etc. In this instance, I think it has us use the column chart. It doesn't matter which one you utilize. But let's go ahead and follow the lab. So now I'm able to view my data in columns based on 1 minute chunks. Now, in this case, we want to once again remove those 200s and the 304s, because as we can see here, the 200s, this line we can clearly see. The 304s, we can pretty clearly see the count of them, but these other ones are just really small. From the scale is just all thrown out of whack because there's so many of the 200s and not so many of these 503s. You can't really see them on the chart properly. So at this point, we can turn these off in two different ways. We can go ahead and use the legend and just click on the values that we want to disable or hide, or we can go to the query window itself. And the query line we would add is this where statement. Now we can put this where statement line up here because we're having the system parse out a status code. And on the next line, we're saying of those status codes, exclude the 200s and the 304s, and then do the time slice and all that. And so now when I run the data, I run the query, my data shows me all the status codes except 200 and 304 because I'm leaving them out right there. All right, cool. So now we've gone ahead and aggregated our results, used transpose, and created a chart. So now let's do the dashboard step. So now we have this data expressed in a way that we find somewhat pleasing. Now let's add this panel to a dashboard. So to do so, big add to dashboard button, just go ahead and click it. Once again, you're going to want to give your panel title a name that makes sense. I'll do status codes. I'm just going to call it status codes. Not feeling very creative this morning. And then you're going to want to specify a dashboard. And so as I did earlier, go ahead and just use your name, use your initials, just something a little different to distinguish your data from someone else's. If you overlap for today, it doesn't really matter. So let me grab one in there. I do have the ability to start to use a folder structure to save this dashboard to a folder if I want to be very organized. In this case, I don't. I'm just going to stick it into the kind of root of personal. And now I have the panel in the dashboard that I created. So I have the panel I created and the dashboard I created, and now the panel is within that dashboard. From here, we can change the look and feel of this. So we can go ahead and add a text panel, for example. So to do so, we're going to go to the top of the screen, go to More Actions, and click Add Panel. And then choose, do we want to add a title panel or a text panel? A title panel would just be a title. Oops, sorry about that. Versus a text panel would be two panels. So title, and then just to show the difference. Title, this is text. So just different ways. How do you want to express the not express the data rather, but how do you want to describe what's going on in this to somebody else? Keeping in mind that you might send this to somebody, a customer, a third party, and this view, well, we've named it pretty good. They may need a little better explanation of what's going on here, so you can provide that to them. You can also change the look and feel of the dashboard. So as I showed earlier, you can go ahead and drag these and rearrange them to what makes sense. You can make them larger or smaller, depending on what makes sense. You could even, and strongly encourage you to toggle the theme to turn it into a dark theme, which just I find a lot easier on the eyes. So just visually, I think it's better. And so once you're done, you would click on done editing, and now you're done. You've edited the dashboard, you've changed the look and feel, and now it's the way that you want to express your data. Well, next we're going to share it. And so to do so, we're going to go to the share icon. And then we would just define who do we want to share this with. So do we want to share this with everybody? Do we want to share this with just admins? Go ahead and either pick some people or don't. As long as you understand how to do it, that's really the most important. And then you would just, so I'd say, all right, I want to share this with everybody. Do you want to notify your recipients by email? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And now I'll click share. And now I've shared this with everybody in my organization. Now the last step is, or one of the last steps here is modifying a dashboard. So in this case, we're going to go back to the Apache app that we created. And we're going to look specifically at the Apache overview dashboard. So I'm going to go to my Apache app that I created, and specifically the Apache overview dashboard, and open it up. And now I have those dashboards that Sumo created for me. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to change the visitor location to, as it says here, zero in on just US locations. So what we can do here is we can take this panel and modify it, which is exactly the point of this lab, modify the dashboard. But let me show you how to do so. So let's say we want to take this dashboard panel and show just US data. We're a US-centric company, let's say, or we just need US-centric data for this use case. I can go to the show and search icon. So I did point this out earlier, which is going to show me the search that was created to create this query, or ultimately create this map. Now what we can do here is we can modify this query, and we can modify it right here. And what we can do is we can say we just want to look at data that's for the US. And so I'm going to grab the line we're going to add, and I'll explain why this line works. So what we're doing here is we're saying, look up all this geographic information from the IPs that we gather. So look up latitude, look up longitude, country code, country name, etc. I can then put a where statement in that says here, when you grab all those country names, now only show me where those country names equal the US. And so now when I run this, the system or the query is only going to look for United States country names. And as a result, it's only going to show United States data. Now that I've modified this query, I still need to save it or update my dashboard. And so to do so, I just click Update Dashboard. I specify the time range I want to utilize. Most cases, you'll use the original time range. In fact, very infrequently will you not. And I click Apply. And now what I've done is I've now modified my dashboard to only show US-centric data. So now when this loads, it's only going to look where country country name equals United States, and now it's just showing US data. So here I was able to use the app to show me what data, what queries Sumo Logic has provided to me, take a look at them, and then modify them to my own needs, but I still didn't have to rewrite the whole query. I just took the query that Sumo provided and just modified it a little bit, and now I'm expressing the data in something that might be more personal. And so that's how you can modify your dashboard. Cool. So the last step here is just going to be creating an alert. What it wants us to do is go to the visitor location search. So we're going to go to the visitor location query, panel, click show on search. And so now I'm looking at the search related to visitor location. But now we can go ahead and create an alert for this. So to do so, we can just go to Save As and choose to schedule this search. Then we're going to decide how frequently do we want the search to run. Every 15 minutes, every hour, every 2 hours, what makes sense. Let's say every 15 minutes. I'm going to decide who do I want, or excuse me, what method do I want to use to alert somebody? So do I want to send an email? Do I want to send a webhook? What do I want to utilize? Who do I want to email? So who do I want to email every 15 minutes with the results from the search? I can put people in my organization or outside my organization. So if I did want to notify a vendor or that of these results, I can do so. I can customize the email subject to specify with parameters, what this alert is used for. So I can clearly say this alert shows visitor location, or something that might be helpful just in the subject line to let somebody know what this is for. And then I can decide what do I actually want to include in the email. So do I want to include the search query itself in that email? Depends. If somebody I'm sending this to can benefit from that query, yeah, then you should probably include it. If I'm sending this to a partner, this having them get the query doesn't help them. Do I want to include the result set? Do I want to include that histogram? Do I include the results as a CSV? So just a couple different options as to what you're going to send somebody in this alert mechanism. And then just very simply click save. And now you've configured an alert that will then be sent out periodically based on the time period that you specify. All right, cool. So that's really all we wanted to do with the labs. The last step of the lab, part 7, is just getting help, just introducing the different ways to get help in regards to utilizing the doc hub, as we call it, utilizing the learn page, which I showed you already. So just different ways to get help, which is helpful. All right. So that concludes the portion of the labs and the demo that I did. But now we want to do the certification portion. So let me talk about it, and then we'll go ahead and do it. So in order to take the certification, you're going to want to make sure that you log out of the test instance that we're using and log back in using your corporate account. If for some reason you don't have a corporate or personal Sumo Logic account and you want to take the exam, if you want to put that in the chat, we can provide you a temporary password. So that's one thing that you'll just want to kind of keep in mind. But assuming you're able to log in on your own, you'll go to Home and you'll go to Certification. And what we'll do now is the Level 1 certification, Sumo Pro User. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take an exam. It's going to be a multiple choice exam of 30 questions. It's a free exam, so it's free for you to take. It's free for your organization, so there's no charge to anybody. And it's basically going to be a way for you to kind of prove that you learned something today about Sumo Logic. So it's going to ask you some questions about different features that we went over today. The exam is going to be open everything. So it's open book, it's open resource. So you can certainly use Sumo Logic, the interface, while you're taking the exam. Maybe you need to run a query and see what this produces or things like that. Please use the documentation. If you want to do a Google search, that's fine. So, open book, open resource, just want to have you, not that you memorize things from today, but that you learn things. So a little bit of a difference there. For each exam, there's going to be preparation. Now, we've gone through it today, but just so you're aware, there's a webinar and a tutorial. The webinar is what I did. The tutorial is what you did. So for each component, there are those that correspond. You're going to have 60 minutes to take the exam. For the level 1 or any of them, you're not going to need the full 60 minutes, probably closer to about 30 minutes. But so what you'll want to do is take the exam and take the exam. As far as schedule go, we'll go ahead and start the exam now. Certainly, if you want to go ahead and take a bio break and come back in a few minutes, please do. But we'll be on the line for about the next hour. And so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll help answer them. We can also be used as resources, should not be your primary resource, but certainly we're available to you. And so, yeah, go ahead and take the exam. And once you pass, you will now be a Sumo Pro user. We'll send you a little kind of a welcome message or a congratulations message with a certificate. We'll send you a LinkedIn piece of information that you can post your badge that you passed, a LinkedIn group of Sumo certified users. And so it's a great way that you can publicize that you've learned this new skill, and it helps with your own personal growth and professional growth as well, rather. Excuse me. So we're going to do the level 1 now. If you're interested in doing level 2, which is going to be the Sumo Power User, we'll actually do that course in about it's about 4 hours from now, so noon Pacific time. And then next week at same times, we'll do level 3, which is Power Admin and Security Power User. So if you're interested in taking those, please join us for those. Just to distinguish the difference between these. So the Pro User is what we did today, which is just kind of a basic knowledge of Sumo logic. What is a dashboard? What is a collector? Basic functionality. Then level 2 is building upon that. So it's more query-based level 2, which is we go through, it's really actually more, actually create an outlier, you'll create a map, you'll create more advanced alerts and, just more advanced query usage. Power Admin is administrative features, so setting up collectors, setting up password policies, that kind of stuff. And then Security Power User is similar to the other Power User, but it's with security use cases in mind. So creating queries that allow you to see where a user has logged in from multiple IPs during a period of time. And then you would decide, all right, I see that Bob logged in from 8 different IPs during the past 15 minutes. We can show you that through the data. We can create a query that allows you to see that. And then you would take that information and then decide, should Bob be doing this or not? And, put your security hat on and figure out what's going on. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of the certifications. We have some new ones coming later this year. So we're expanding our certification program. Well, let's see, any other questions? All right, cool. So let's go ahead and get started. So take the exam. Once you're done with the exam, you're free to go. You don't have to hang out for the next hour. And hopefully you'll be able to join us for the next portion at noon Pacific time. So best of luck to everybody. And like I said, any questions, just go ahead and post. So thank you for joining today.